Welcome to the Millionaire Real Estate Summit, where you'll learn from top real estate agents, team leaders, and brokers what their number one lead sources were to sell over $1 million. You'll gain the strategies and tactics you need to convert more leads and set more appointments.
Hey guys, today's guest, I'm so excited, is Mike Hogan. Mike Hogan, welcome.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chantel. Good to see you.
Tell everyone a little bit about you and tell us about how your business began and where you are right now.
Sure, yeah. So I got into the business in 2005. A couple years later, I got my broker's license and really was working as an individual agent up through about 2014. 2014, I basically had enough. I had to hire a buyer's agent to work with me. Hired my first buyer's agent in January and fired him 2 weeks later. And really was kind of gun shy about hiring another agent for a little while. So July of that year, I hired my next agent. August, I hired my next one. I'm happy to say that both of those two first agents are still with me today. One's in the director of sales role. So we started the team in 2014. At that point, it was me doing about $25-30 million a year in production as a solo agent with an admin or two. We grew the team till 2000, actually earlier this year, operating just as a team under Keller Williams at the time. We'd gotten up to about 45 agents in multiple cities. We took advantage of the expansion opportunities under KW and were in cities throughout North Carolina, cities throughout Virginia, 12 different markets to be exact. And then mid-year this year, we made the change and went out on our own as a brokerage. So we're now an independent brokerage, which has been just absolutely phenomenal for us. We still operate as a team. I joke and call it a teamerage, but we still operate as a team. But there's a good chance in 2020 we will open the general brokerage side of our business as well.
Awesome. So what, in your opinion, is the best lead source that you have found so far, hands down, that has helped you to grow in this way?
Yeah. And of course, they're different for everybody. Everybody's got something that works well for them. In 2010, I started working with Zillow leads. And I know a lot of people are booing and hissing right now. But 2010, I started with Zillow and it worked really well for me. I don't know. Maybe my personality just worked well with those types of leads. I don't know what it was. But we've been in a partnership with them since 2010. And even today, they're our number one lead source. We do far and above more business with them than we do any other lead source.
Awesome. And so, Zillow has a bad rap. And let's talk a little bit about why they have a bad rap first, and what you have done to say, that's fine. Everything has pros and cons. Let's talk about the cons for a second, and then we'll really talk about the pros. So what are some of the things that agents just go, these are the cons. This is why I won't work with Zillow.
Oh my God. Yeah. You name it. All you got to do is go on any one of the number of Facebook groups out there dedicated to agents. And whenever somebody says, hey, what do you think about Zillow leads? It's fun to just watch it. Seriously, it is everything you can imagine. Some people say, hey, I gave them $1,000 a month and I received 2 leads, or all the leads I receive are all rental calls, or, hey, they call when I'm not available to take the phone. And if I'm not available to take the phone, they send it to another agent. The leads are too expensive. They get our leads from our MLS and sell them back to us. I mean, there's no shortage of complaints about Zillow for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about ROI because, determining the return on investment or the ROI of your marketing and advertising is absolutely vital to any healthy business.
100%.
And the ROI is the ratio of your profit to your cost and the bang for your buck. Like, how much bang for the buck am I getting on this particular platform?
Yep.
And I know for me personally, it's so crazy because what's happened with Zillow was I started with a certain amount. And this is where I think people kind of get messed up. So I started with Zillow and we had a great ROI. And then I kept increasing and kept increasing.
And it kept coming down.
and the ROI was going down, down. And then I just got more and more frustrated. And I think that with every single platform, there's that point where you go, okay, it's a great ROI. It's a great ROI. And then it's not anymore, because it's kind of like doing radio ads, right? Like if you did radio ads, there's a point where you could continue to double the amount of money that you're spending,
but you don't get anything else for it.
Yeah, you're not going to double the amount of leads that are coming in.
Yep.
So first talk about, because believe it or not, there's different ways that people calculate ROI too. Yep. So I want to give a real practical number of like, how do you choose to define your ROI? And what is that ROI for you for Zillow compared to something else? Sure.
So let's talk about first how we define ROI, because you're right. There's multiple definitions, which is crazy to me that you can possibly define it in multiple ways. But we really look at ROI in two ways. We look at our gross ROI and we look at our net ROI. Our gross ROI is simply put our total GCI that we make, and that's our agents, the company, any splits that we have to do, all of that total GCI combined, divided into the total amount that we spend. Gross, 100% gross ROI. And that's how we define the gross. Now, the net ROI is how much the company makes, or how much essentially I put into my pocket at the end of the day. And that is, I take out the agent splits, I take out any splits. It's simply what's left after everybody is paid from those Zillow leads. And again, that number divided into the total amount that we spend. And so my net ROI typically is going to be roughly half of what my gross ROI is. But that's just the way we define it. Does that make sense?
Yes. So give people, just give an example. Like if you could, let's just say that someone spent, let's say you spent $1,000 on, what would be those numbers, kind of, for people to understand, as easy numbers as you could come up with?
Sure. So think about it. If you spend $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year that you're spending, right? And let's say that out of that $12,000,
but let's just base it on the month. Let's not base it on the year.
Oh,
let's just say,
okay.
Let's just base it so that it makes the math as easy as possible.
Okay, sure. So let's say that $1,000 a month, and you're getting, I'm going to be realistic. Let's say you're getting, I don't know, 2 sales a month for $1,000 spend. Maybe it's 3 sales a month. It's really going to depend on where you are, what your lead cost is, and what $1,000 actually buys you, because every market is different.
So let's talk about that. For you, when you spend $1,000, how many leads are you getting for that $1,000?
It's going to be easier for me to say it this way, because I haven't spent $1,000 on Zillow in a long time.
Okay, let's actually do your numbers then. Let's actually do your numbers, since you know this. Okay.
Yeah. So we get on average about 700 leads a month out of Zillow.
Okay.
And that's across
and you're
all of our
spending
different
how
markets.
much?
And we're spending right now about just over $30,000 a month.
Okay.
That's right now.
So 30,000.
Yep.
And if you take 30,000 divided by 70, that gives you what?
No, 700.
Oh, 700. My bad. I'm sorry. 30,000 divided by 30,000 divided by 700. You're spending $42 per lead.
There you go.
Okay.
Now that's a mixture of all their different lead types, because they have 3 different, or 1, 2, 3 different lead types. So that's a mixture of all their different lead types, and they all those different lead types convert at different ways too. So we even have to break it down by the different lead types that Zillow does as well.
Okay, so let's stop right there and let's talk about those. So what are the 3 different lead types that there are?
Sure. So the gold in Zillow leads right now are the concierge leads. So those are the leads that Zillow, when a lead comes in, Zillow reaches out to them. Zillow has a call center. They reach out to them, basically operating as an ISA. They reach out to them. They get them on the phone. They do some basic pre-qualifications. Are you interested in buying a home? Are you interested in buying a home in the next year? Those types of basic questions. That person then said, they then ask that person, are you ready to talk to an agent? And that person says, yes, I'm ready to talk to an agent. They're like, great, we're going to transfer you right now to a live agent who's ready to take your call. Those are the gold right now, because those are the ones that we convert at the absolute highest rate. That process started in November of last year, so we've been doing it for just over 12 months now. and we're averaging about a 12% conversion rate on those calls.
Okay.
So those are the goal, and that's about 40% of the leads, 30 to 40% of the leads.
Now, how much? Now, do you know how much you're paying for just those leads? Because when we calculated that you're spending $42 per lead, that's with all 3 different lead types.
Yep.
Do you know what you're spending for the concierge leads?
Well, you don't break it down, like you don't pay separately for the concierge leads versus any other leads. So you still have to look at the overall
Total
amount.
Okay.
You could argue that those are the leads you're actually paying for and everything else is free. You could argue that. If that's the case, you take if we're doing 40% of our leads, we get 700 a month. That's 280 leads, concierge calls a month, divided by 30,000. You could figure out the number that way. But we don't. It's not broken down. We don't pay separately for concierge leads versus any others. We just pay. I pay my $30,000 a month, and that covers everything.
Okay. And then what's type number 2?
All right. So type number 2 would be nurture leads. Nurture leads are all of those people that request information, but Zillow is not able to get in touch with. Zillow continues to try to get in touch with them, and over time, they're not able to get in touch with them. They basically consider them a nurture lead. They're people who say, I'm not ready to talk to an agent, or the people that are looking for rental properties. They're basically everybody that Zillow can't either A, get in touch with, or B, transfer to an agent. Those are nurture leads. And those are leads that, they're going to be a longer nurture period. They call them nurture leads for a reason. They're going to be a longer nurture period. They're not people that are hot and ready to roll and ready to buy a house in the next 6 months. Those we convert just under 1%. 0.85 to be exact. And so that's the second type. Then the third type of lead are profile leads. And those are those leads that they're searching around. They click on our profile for whatever reason. It's certainly not my face. So I'm guessing it's a number of past sales or the number of reviews we have or something like that. But those are people that actually click on our profile and say, hey, I want more information from this agent specifically. Instead of requesting information from all the different agents out there, they want to talk to this agent specifically. So those are profile leads, and those are about 30 to 40% of our overall leads. So 30, let's call it 35% are concierge leads, 35% are profile leads, with the remaining 30% then would be nurture leads.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And so, they had said at one point that I thought that Zillow said that everything was moving to concierge and that they weren't even going to be giving out any other leads besides concierge leads. Is that not true anymore? Or what is your take on that?
Yeah, so throughout 2018, as Zillow was rolling out, it was called the Premier Agent 4.0 platform. Everything before, they've always named it Zillow 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Well, the Premier Agent platform 4.0 was what they were rolling out throughout 2018. And what they found out, at first, it was exactly that model that you said. They were only giving out the concierge leads, and all other leads, Zillow was keeping them to nurture them themselves. You still would get the profile leads, but the nurture leads were the piece that you weren't getting. And what they found out is people wanted those nurture leads. Agents wanted the nurture leads for multiple reasons. Number one, it may be that you have a team, and just getting the concierge leads weren't enough to feed your team. So in some cases, that was it. They just wanted the quantity of leads. They weren't worried about the quality. They really just wanted the quantity of leads. It could be that they would rather have, as an agent, I would rather have the leads in my system where I can nurture them as opposed to allowing Zillow to nurture them. Right. That way I have control over those leads. So that was true. And then throughout 2018, they found out that process just wasn't working. So they started in October last year, they actually announced that they were going to start giving the nurture leads as part of the process as well. But they would label them as nurture leads. But truly what you're paying for when you get Zillow leads are those concierge calls, because those are the goal.
Awesome. And so what is it different that you would have to say to a Zillow lead versus, say, a different lead? Like, if you had a radio lead, let's go over what does that script look like and what is the differences and what you would say to try to convert that lead.
Yeah. So, the big thing about a Zillow lead is you have to know those personalities. And it's funny because they're all different. And you as the person on the phone, whether you're an ISA or you're an agent that's taking the leads directly, what you're trying to do is establish a relationship with that person in the first 15 or 30 seconds of that phone call and figure out what it is they're trying to do. I mean, our goal is to get a person in a house as quickly as possible, because most people that are being transferred, that's what they want. They just want to see the house. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to ask a ton of questions. They just want to get in the house and take a look at it. But you do still have those people that just, hey, they're just calling to ask a question, don't necessarily want to set up an appointment to see it, just like to ask a question. But our goal when we get that person on the phone is get them in the house as quickly as possible. Because if we can get them in the house, it's just like showing a car. You get a person in a car and let them test drive that new BMW. There's a really good chance they're going to fall in love with that car. Same thing is true with the house. If you can get them in the house and get them looking at it, get them excited about the process, then you can talk to them about things like financing and so forth. You earn the right to ask them more probing questions at that point. But our goal is just to get them in the house as quickly as possible. So our script, typically, person calls in. All we're doing is we're asking, we're obviously introducing ourselves and asking a little bit about them, but we're trying to set an appointment with them to get in to take a look at the house. Is today at 3 or tomorrow at 5 work better for you? And sometimes they'll say, well, I just really had a couple questions. And at that point, we've had enough time to actually pull the property up on our system and take a look at it. So we're ready to answer questions. But again, we always go back to, when would you like to set a time to see the house? Because that's when, if we can get in front of a person, our chances of converting them into a sale rise exponentially.
So are you getting all buyer leads, or are you also getting seller leads from Zillow?
We get both.
What would be the percentage?
Oh, seller leads are a tiny, tiny percentage. I think, I don't know, a couple of years ago, Zillow ran a promotion that if you increased your spend by $500 a month, you'd get seller leads for free. The big reason for that is nobody really has a true viable seller lead product, at least not in the online world. It's a different type of lead to create. It's a hard lead to create. I think personally, we could get into iBuyers later, but I think that's a big reason why iBuyer, the Zillow iBuyer model is around, because that they truly see that as a good seller lead. But seller leads are a tiny percentage of what we get. But what we do find, we get a lot of buyer leads, but a high percentage of those buyer leads also have a house to sell. So even though they come in, they are a buyer lead, they end up being a buyer and a seller for us.
Gotcha. And so we kind of figured out, okay, you're paying about $42 per lead for the concierge nurture leads and profiled leads. Yep. But what does it cost you per closing, and how many are you closing per month?
So let's see. Well, on a monthly basis, it's hard to say because it does vary quite a bit.
Yeah.
In the spring, we may do 100. Let's say we average about. So we're going to end up this year at about 700 sales. So 700 divided by 12, what is that going to be? It's about, I should know that number off the top of my head. 700
divided by 12 is 58.
58. So say it's an average of 60 sales a month. That's about where we are.
Okay.
All right.
So about 60 sales. So
now, not all of those are Zillow. Only going to be about, probably only about 40% of those are going to be Zillow.
Okay. So if you took just say 60 sales, times 40%, about 24 of those are Zillow.
There you go.
Okay. So if you took 30,000 and divided it by 24, it's costing you approximately $1,250 per closing for a Zillow lead.
Yep.
Now let's go through that. And what is your average home sale price?
Our average is $280,000.
Okay. So if you took $280,000, and do you charge a 3% commission?
We do.
Okay. So then that means you're making $8,400 on that.
Yep.
But then talk about your splits with your agents of what they're getting, and then what it kind of breaks down that you're making for that Zillow lead.
Sure. So you can figure on.
So let's just base it on $8,000. Let's just say your average commission is $8,000.
Yeah. So first off, that number, the 80 or the 8,000, is what I would be basing my gross ROI off of. So if I took that 8,000 and divided it by what is that, $1,250? We said was the average cost. That's right at about a 6.5 or so ROI, gross ROI. Now, when I talk about my splits, now, most of my agents are going to be on, let's say it's an average of a 50-50 split. We have a couple of different split models. Let's just say it's an average of a 50-50 split. So our agents pay in, we split the commission 50-50. And then I have about another 10% that I pay out to managers and so forth. So there's a couple of other people that I pay out, and that equals 10%. So my take on the whole thing is going to be 40%.
Okay. Gotcha.
So you take that 8,000 and multiply it by 40%. And that's my net. And if you divide that by the 1250, that's going to tell you what my net ROI is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about your team and what, how the leads come in. So let's say it comes from a concierge. So the concierge calls, how does it get divvied out to the different people on your team? Who's answering the phone? Is the agent answering the phone, or do you have inside sales answering that concierge call?
Yeah, so we actually used to do the inside sales model, and with the concierge team, what we found out is people really want to talk to an agent. When you talk to a person the first time, they're expecting that person to be able to answer their questions. Unfortunately, it's usually a Zillow rep. So that Zillow rep is then transferring them to us. So the last thing we want to do is transfer that call to another person who can answer their questions. Mm-hmm. So we put it right in the hands of an agent. And the way we run our model is it's an agent on duty model. So our agents are on duty every 8 days for a 24-hour period. So during that 24-hour period from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m., they're responsible for all leads that come in that day. And we typically have 2 or 3 agents that are on duty at any given time. So what that means is all leads, all concierge calls that come in, all sign calls that come in, all internet leads, email leads, everything you can possibly imagine, they all come into that day, and they come into those agents. Now, we use a CRM, it's called Follow Up Boss. That's our lead management system. So as leads come in, we have rules written in that system that tells us how to divvy up the leads. And we just go in each morning. I have a sales manager that goes in every morning and just changes who's on duty for that day so that they're getting all of those leads. But we also have phone calls set up so that when a concierge lead comes in, it rings all of those agents that are on duty that day. So let's say it's 3 people on duty. The call comes in, it rings all 3 of those people at one time. The first one who picks it up gets the lead. And then we also have a backup person, which is typically the sales manager. That's a 4th person that in case for some reason the phone keeps ringing and one of those 3 people don't answer it, our sales manager will then answer the call and work the lead. But the reason for that is with concierge leads, if you miss a call, it's not a big deal if you miss a call. All that happens is that lead then goes to the next person in line. They call the next agent in line. But then the next time around, it'll come back around and it will start with you because you didn't get it last time. But you have to make sure that you're answering. Zillow says you have to answer the call at least 50% of the time in order to get the number of leads that you're paying for. So when you sign up for Zillow, you agree to pay for, I pay $30,000 a month. I'm expecting to get 700 leads. But if I only answer the call 25% of the time, I may only get 500 leads. So now my cost per lead is a lot higher. Whereas if I answer the call a lot more often, maybe instead of getting my normal share of the leads, I'm actually going to get a little bit more. So we've got our system set up so we do not miss phone calls. Our answer rate with Zillow is super high, which in the 90% plus range, which means that very few calls are lost and get sent to other agents.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about tips to get, because, I've heard agents say, I'm paying $200 per lead. I'm paying $300 per lead for Zillow. And the fact that you're able to get these leads at $42 a lead is very impressive. Now, do you think it's because of the fact that you're spending so much, or what are some really practical tips that people can do? How do they get it so where they're getting their cost per lead as low as they possibly can?
Yeah. I mean, yes, there is a component there that because I spend so much, I do get, Zillow does offer price breaks at certain price levels. So yes, we are getting a little bit of a price break just because of the amount of money that we spend. But really what's more important is how you manage your lead flow, how you manage what zip codes you're in. And I'll tell you, everyone has this notion when they get on Zillow, they want to buy leads in the most expensive zip codes they can because that's where they want to sell houses. They want to sell that one zip code that the average price is 500,000 plus or whatever, depending on your market. And what we found are those zip codes just really don't work that well. The higher price zip codes don't work for us. And we think a big part of that is because most of the people who are inquiring about a house on Zillow in the high price ranges typically are more savvy buyers and already have relationships. They already have realtor relationships. They already have mortgage relationships. So really all they're doing is they are truly just looking for information. So we made a strategy decision. It's been a couple of years now where we don't buy in the top zip codes. We may buy a little bit just for branding purposes, but we really don't try to compete in some of the most expensive zip codes. In fact, if you look at a heat map of my area, I'm in Richmond, Virginia. If you look at a heat map of my area, it's really cold right in the middle. The downtown area, some of the close-in West End areas, they're super expensive, high-end houses, and they're super expensive leads. We're very cold there. Where we're warm is on the outlying areas, the more the suburbs and even into the rural areas. The farther into the rural areas you go, typically the lower the cost per lead. So what we do is we tend to have a good blend of some of the higher price leads, a lot of the moderate price leads, and then some of the lower price leads. And altogether, it ends up bringing our lead cost down. So that was a strategy decision we made a couple of years ago. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that most people have. If they're spending $200 on a single lead, number one, they're probably going to be in some of the more expensive areas. Now, if you go out to places like Seattle, $200 per lead is cheap. They could be as much as $1,400 or $1,500 per lead. So this is all relative. But really, I think if people are complaining that their cost per lead is too high, I think they need to do two things. One, they need to know if the ROI is worth it. Because your cost per lead is high. As long as your ROI is high, who cares what your cost per lead is? But the other thing is, if your ROI is low and your cost per lead is high, then you probably are in the wrong zip codes. You probably need to look at some of the other zip codes. Or you need to start answering the phone better. A lot of the people that I hear complain about having low ROI and high cost, when I ask them what their connection rate is super low. They're answering 20% of their calls. In some cases, 5 or 10% of their calls. That's a big, big piece of it. So you got to make sure that all the bases are covered. But I think just looking at your strategy for buying leads is a way to keep your costs down.
Yeah, and I think that, Zillow Premier Agent charges based on basically three factors. The zip code sales, like the cost to advertise in different zip codes, is based on the average price of homes in that area. That's number one. Number two, the competition, like the number of real estates in a certain zip code affects the cost because more agents mean more competition for the same leads. And then third, like you said, the ad spend, the total amount each agent has allotted for advertising, kind of determines, how much you're going to pay. So
let's go back to one of the points you just made about the number of agents on a zip code, because that's actually another really critical point, especially for independent agents. The way concierge is working now, that they get somebody on the call, they transfer the call. If they transfer it to a person, that person not able to answer the phone, it goes to the next agent in line. I will say this is probably the one point where an individual agent is at a little bit of a disadvantage to a team, because an individual agent is one person answering the phone. And if that person is in a listing appointment, or they're with a buyer, or they're out to dinner with their family, they're at their kid's soccer game, they're not always able to answer that call. Whereas a team, most of the time, has a process set up to make sure that a lot of those calls are being answered. So one of the things that if I'm an individual agent and I'm thinking about investing in Zillow, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the zip codes where there's a very low number of teams in that zip code. Because I know as an individual agent, I'm going to be competing against guys that have processes that are designed to answer a lot of phone calls. And as an individual agent, I know I'm not going to be able to answer a ton of those. So I think that if you're an individual agent, look at the makeup of the zip codes that you're going into. Look at the makeup of your competition. And make a decision for yourself. Be very self-aware and figure out how well do you stack up against the competition. If you know that your processes aren't that great, don't go into a zip code where you're competing against 3 large teams that probably have awesome processes. That's another point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no. I'm glad you did. I love it. One time my Zillow rep had said something to me, and he said, well, that is your share of voice, which is your SOV. Have you ever heard someone say that to you?
Yeah, that's one of the old school terms. Yeah, I mean, share of voice was something they talked about a lot last year. Yeah, I mean, it was, you owned a percentage of the zip code, and that percentage that you owned was considered to be your share of voice, which basically just meant the number of times that your face popped up on an impression. It's essentially the number of impressions that you were getting. It's kind of the same thing. But basically, Zillow is set up, and it typically there's four agents that can show up on a particular listing. The one is going to be the listing agent, which obviously they don't highlight. But then you've got the three potential agents that are buying impressions in that zip code. And each one of those blocks makes up 100%. So you can own, let's say you want to buy 70% of the zip code. Well, you're buying 70% of one of those three blocks. So what you're doing is you're basically buying the fact that your face is going to show up 70% of the time. Whenever somebody clicks on that zip code, your face is going to show up 70% of the time in one of those three blocks. It doesn't mean that you're going to show up in, if you're in 70%, it doesn't mean you're going to show up 70% of the time. It just means you're going to be in 70% of those impressions in one of those three blocks.
So let's talk about the fact that, if you want to, a lot of people have said to me that the concierge service, since they started doing it, they aren't getting as good of a conversion. And then there's a whole other group of people who are like, man, since they've been doing the concierge service, I've been doing better. Which kind of camp are you in, and why?
Yeah. It's like the never-ending question. I think I'd like to say we're doing better. Our ROI is higher this year than it was last year. Our conversion rate this year is higher than it was last year. What I would love to see is Zillow figure out how to get a higher percentage of those leads on the phone where they can transfer them. Because like I said before, we kill it with those. We're converting those at 10% plus. We actually have one agent on our team who has been converting at 21% on those conversion calls. That's enormous. I mean, the average online lead in the country, people are converting like 1.25%.
Right.
So if you can get, anything north of 5 or 10%, that's just astronomical. And that's just because of the new model. It's not because we're awesome. I mean, we are, but it's not because we're awesome. It's because Zillow changed their model, and those leads are converting at a much higher rate. So Zillow is taking the ISA model essentially and doing it at scale for us on our behalf. And that's why we're getting a much better conversion. So they just learned from what teams are doing across the country with the ISA model.
Now, what about if a zip code isn't available and someone says like, I really want this zip code? What are their kind of options? Like, do you have any tips or tricks for getting a zip code if they don't have one? The one
that happens a lot. That happens a lot because, everybody is, 10 years ago, I didn't have that issue, or 9 years ago, I didn't have that issue. Today, now a lot of zip codes are locked out. What I typically tell people is if there's a particular zip code that you really want for whatever reason, first off, if anything at all comes available, I don't care if it's a small percentage, you get it. You always get it, and you can keep adding to it over time, which eventually you'll add up and you'll be in a good spot. But you have to check it every day. Agents' credit cards get declined, and they can't. When that happens, they lose their share. So you've got to be on it and be looking at it every day so you can pick that up. The other piece I would say is buy the zip codes around it. Sometimes if there's a super expensive zip code, I don't want to buy that zip code, but I may buy the cheaper little brother zip code that's just across the border, or maybe it's across the river or something like that. Because a lot of people, as they're looking at a property, they're not looking in one specific zip code. They may look in 3 or 4 zip codes. They may end up buying in a more expensive zip code, but we have a ton of leads that come in for one zip code, and we end up selling them in something else. So I would say if you can't buy in a zip code you really want, find the little brother zip codes that are less expensive around it that has some availability, and buy those. Now, if those aren't available, then you just got to wait your turn. And wait for some availability to come. But look at it, check it every day. The beauty of Zillow's system is the interface. You can go into the interface all day long, just put your cursor on a zip code and see what's available. You don't have to call anybody or anything. It's literally all online. So you can look at it multiple times a day. I call it day trading leads. I mean, we basically are looking at leads throughout the day figuring out what's available, what's not available, where we need to pick up, where we need to drop, and that kind of thing. I always watch my competition, and I always watch what comes available. Because if something's available, I'm probably going to pick it up.
Now, someone had told me that, obviously we use Boomtown for our website, but someone had told me that Zillow offers their own website, kind of like a Boomtown. Yeah. Is that true? Have you heard of that? And have you dealt with that at all?
Zillow has offered websites to agents for years. Mm-hmm. I've never used it. Mm-hmm. I think at one time I played with it just to see what it looked like. But that's been ages ago. We don't do it. Now they do have their own CRM. I don't know a ton of people. I don't know a ton of top agents that use Zillow's websites.
I don't know anyone who does.
Yeah, but I can tell you there's a lot of people that are using the CRM. And I think, the future of Zillow, I think Zillow is going to require more use of their CRM. So I think a lot of agents are starting to use it today to get used to it.
And now go ahead and tell people what's your second lead generation, like your top tool for leads coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about all the top ones that we use. I mean, so Zillow is number one. Realtor.com is going to be number two for us. We do a tremendous amount with Facebook leads, and we do some Google pay-per-click. Those are our top true lead sources. Now, we do a lot of business through referral. We have somebody in our office whose sole job it is to work all of our past client database to get referrals from them. So referrals are still a massive part of our business, and we're trying to systemize a lot of those things. But Realtor.com is our number two on lead source.
So with Realtor.com, what is the difference between Realtor.com and Zillow as far as ROI goes? And how are you treating those clients any differently, or is it the same?
Yeah, so with Realtor.com, I mean, our ROI on Realtor is going to be about 30% less than it is on Zillow. And for the most part, it's always been lower than Zillow. I think we had one. Yeah, I think we had 1 year in there, like 2017, where, or maybe it was 2018, where Realtor.com outperformed Zillow. But that was kind of an anomaly. I think Zillow had some stuff going on internally where they were doing some testing, and it really screwed up the leads for a few months. But overall, they've been playing catch up and continue to play catch up. But that being said, the ROI is still acceptable, even though it's less than what I'm getting on Zillow. It's still a positive ROI, and I can still make money on it. And there's leads available in most cases. So, we continue to use it. We don't spend as much money there, but we continue to use it. And we know that as long as it's a positive ROI, it works for us. Now, you asked about those leads, like the difference between those leads. Mm-hmm. I will say with Zillow, of course, they're being transferred to us. They work really well from that standpoint. And most people on Zillow, if they're asking for information, they're typically only asking one agent for it. Now, sometimes they'll click on multiple properties and ask different agents. So, you have that in play. But most of the time, a Zillow lead is going to one agent. Whereas with Realtor.com, those leads are automatically going to two agents, unless you pay extra to get what they call I can't even remember what they call the lead, but it's a type of lead where only one agent is getting that lead, or you can buy it cheaper and know that it's going to go to at least two agents. That's the one we do. But the difference is, because that lead is going to two people immediately, either your ISAs or your agents have to be on it and calling them literally in 10 seconds or less. In many cases, as an agent, you're competing against Realtor.com, because Realtor.com last year bought OpCity. And OpCity is essentially a Zillow concierge team. It's just like that. It's a massive ISA center. And they're calling the leads too. So in many cases, you're actually competing against OpCity, who is very, very good at what they do.
Right.
So the important thing, what's more important with Realtor.com, speed to lead is critical for both lead sources, for any lead source for that matter. But with Realtor.com, if you're not on the phone with that person in the first 5 to 10 seconds after that lead comes in, you're probably not going to get it, because they're probably already talking to somebody else.
OpCity.
Yeah, gotta love it.
Yeah. Great. Well, any other tips that you would say, like, as far as lead generation goes on with Zillow and Realtor.com, that you'd say, here's the things that we've done to kind of be able to convert these leads better? Any other tips for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things you can do to convert leads better. I mean, one is you have to have a process for nurturing leads. Too many people have this misconception that a Zillow lead or Realtor.com lead should be ready to buy a house this weekend. We would all love it if that were the case, and if it were that easy, everybody would do it, and the cost of these leads would be astronomical. But in reality, you have to nurture leads. And if you don't have a nurture process in place, you're really shooting your foot. And where most agents fail with internet leads is they call them the first time. They may call them a second time, but after that, if the person doesn't answer, they give up. And you're never going to get the kind of ROI out of either one of those sources if that's your process. So you really have to have a long-term nurture process in place. I mean, we've got a couple of systems in place. I mean, our CRM does a great drip campaign, text and email drip campaign that continues reaching out to those people to start a conversation. We use a company called Ylopo that retargets our leads for us. So when those leads come in, we automatically set them up on a list search. And if they open that email and go to our website and look at that property, we put a cookie on their machine so that we start to retarget them on Facebook. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but a long-term nurture program is absolutely critical for any internet lead. I don't care if it's Zillow, Realtor.com, Boomtown, whatever you do, you have to have a long-term nurture process in place, and that is absolutely critical.
I love that. So how many times would you say that you need to call somebody in order, like the average number of times, to get that person to convert?
Yeah, it's probably about 16. It's about 16 touches. It's not necessarily 16 calls. 5 years ago, calling was a way to do it. Today, it's texting. So you have to use, we call it the trifecta. We do text, email, and call. And you have to do it multiple times. So in order to do it multiple times, our agents are doing it, but more importantly, we've automated a ton of that. So having an automated process that does that for you is really one way of squeezing those leads as much as you possibly can to get as many sales out of them as you can.
And can you name some of those automated processes that you've put into place and any of the programs that helped you to automate? Yeah,
so most of the CRM products out there have some sort of texting feature to them. Follow Up Boss does. We've been using that for years. There's a lot of plugins that you can use with that. We also, again, I'll mention Ylopo. That was another one that we used. One of the ones out there.
So besides the Facebook retargeting, what else does Ylopo do for you?
That's really the biggest component. But they're also our IDX website. So they're capturing leads for us there as well. We can pay for Facebook leads from Ylopo too. We do some of that as well. They also do some Google pay-per-click for us as well. But really, I look at Ylopo as a lead nurturing program. It's not so much of a lead gen system, which a lot of people use it for that. And we do some of that, but really it's more of a lead nurturing product. And that's the biggest piece is, it's just like Boomtown in the sense that the lead comes in, they automatically get set up on a listing alert, and we start emailing them those listings and texting them those listings. But when that person responds and they actually click on one of those listings, that's where the critical magic happens, because once they click on it, they go to our website. Once they hit our website, we then get their cookie. We can put a cookie on their machine so that then when they go back to Facebook, we're able to retarget them on Facebook for that. So that's actually been one of the biggest things that we've seen this year that's helped us is that conversion. Now, the other piece that Ylopo does is we can upload our entire database to Ylopo just by tagging our leads and allow them to go back in. They set each of those leads up on a new listing alert, and we're able to retarget leads. I mean, essentially all of our leads in our database. We've got 70,000 plus leads in our database, and we put all of those into Ylopo and let them do all the retargeting for us and start emailing those people. So we actually had a 20%. I say a 20%. We had a 200% jump in the number of leads that we sold this year that were over 2 years old, which is huge. So you're going back, you're basically, bringing back in sales that you paid for in the past, and you're actually able to collect that money today. So I don't want to say it's a free lead, but it's about as close as you can possibly get to a free lead.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad you said that, because what happened is what we started doing is we averaged the amount of time, and we calculated, I think it was like 7.5 months, meaning from the time that a lead came in, the average time they were closing was 7.5 months.
It's 4.5 for us.
Yeah. So and the thing is that a lot of times people, like, because we go back and our inside sales department calls and calls and calls. But a lot of times people are like, I want the new lead. Don't give me an older lead. But the ones that are 6 months out, those are the ones that actually are really great, because that's when they're really ready, because they're starting their search so much earlier.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, we explain to our agents like this. Look, when leads come in, you're going to get that one lead a month that's ready to buy a house this weekend. And it's awesome when that happens. We all love it. But that's going to be the very small percentage of your leads. Really, the biggest benefit of leads is around that 4 to 7 month time frame. And that's when the bulk of people that you receive are going to start at least being serious about looking. Because we're seeing people are starting 4 to 5 months before they're really ready to buy a house, is when they get on Zillow and they start looking. Actually, it's about a year before they're ready to buy that they start looking on Zillow. And it's about 6 months before they're actually ready to buy that they start clicking and asking for information. So they're out there for a good 6 months looking at properties and seeing who's out there. That's why I think it's important. It brings up another piece with marketing. A lot of agents like to bring seasonality into their advertising, and they'll advertise heavily in the first 6 months of the year, and then they cut their advertising in the second 6 months of the year. But we think it's important because people are shopping a year ahead of time before they're ready to buy, and that's when they see the number of agents that they see. So we think it's important to be in there all the time. But that being said, the older leads convert really, really well, and especially if you have a really good nurturing program. If you have one that's automated, even the better. But even if you don't, if you've got a great ISA team that's reaching out to those people, the older leads are actually better than the new leads. They're going to convert at a higher rate over time.
So do you have a checklist that says, like, here's what we're going to do, like written out of, like, here's the checklist for the nurturing that we do?
We have action plans that are set up. I don't know that I would call them a checklist, but we have an action plan. And we have action plans for each different type of lead that we get. We even have them for sign calls.
Would you be willing to give that as a gift to the listeners, like what that action plan is?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Tell listeners where they can follow your work and find out more about you.
Yeah. So again, my name is Mike Hogan. I'm primarily in the Richmond, Virginia market. That's where we're headquartered. We also cover Charlottesville, Fredericksburg, and a few other areas. We're not anywhere near Virginia Beach because I don't want to compete against Chantel. But you can find us on our website at hogangrp.com. That's abbreviated for group, so hogangrp.com. And you can find us on Facebook, Insta, everything. I'm on every sort of social media that's out there. So you can find us wherever you look for us. Just Google us.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being on our show. We really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chantel. Have a great day.
You too. And listeners, stay tuned for our next coming episode. We'll see you in just a few.